Welcome on into the All Aussie Rules Football Podcast. This is our round two review episode. All eight matches, all eight winners, all eight losers. Let's check them out. Welcome on in, everybody, to the All Aussie Rules Football Podcast. This is episode number 16 of 2025, and this is going to be our round two review. There was 8 matches on the weekend. We're going to be running through them all. We'll look at the best players, the best teams, everything important from the weekend of football. So we're going to run through that today as we do every Monday episode. We review, and obviously on Thursdays we preview the upcoming round. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, the follow button, whichever platform you're listening / watching this on. Apparently I've already struggled talking 40 seconds in, but that is fine. So yeah, hit that like button, hit the follow. Leave a comment below. Let me know how your team is going. Do you agree with my opinions on them or not? We're going to jump into... We might as well just go straight into the first game of the weekend. It was Carlton Hawthorn. It was Thursday night football at the MCG. This was the first of 4 games that I went to on the weekend, and it was a wet one. She rained... heavy downpour before the game, and then throughout the game off and on it rained throughout, so a bit slippery conditions in this one. Final scores were 8-12-60 for Carlton, so some inaccurate kicking, and 12-8-80 for Hawthorn. What to note from this one? Carlton put up a solid enough fight, in all honesty, after a pretty horrible week 1 performance where they lost to Richmond. They came out and did all right here against Hawthorn. They were in it. They were leading in the third quarter. Hawthorn did manage 3 quick ones, or 4 quick ones really, midway through the second quarter, which gave them a lead, and then from that point on they held it all the way through to the final siren. They definitely looked at the better team in that last bit, Hawthorn, than Carlton, but it wasn't the worst performance from Carlton, in my not expert opinion. As you can see, if you're watching this video, if you're just listening, Hawthorn had a rating of 48.37 according to my ratings, and a 41.53 for Carlton. So Hawthorn clearly the better team, according to the stats. +1 inside 50s for the Hawks. They were +50 disposals. Kick to handball ratio pretty similar for both teams. Clearances, it was a heavy stoppage game, obviously. Being a wet weather game, most of them tend to have a lot of stoppages, especially non-centre clearance stoppages. 51 Carlton, 39 Hawthorn. So Carlton are really starting to get their, I guess, clearance game going, and Hawthorn are kind of trending the reverse direction. Their pre-season, they started all right in that way, but I think 2 weeks in a row they've lost stoppages. If my memory serves me correct, I think they lost it to the Bombers the week before. I don't think it's anything to be too concerned about, but it is just worth noting. Contested footy went the way of Carlton, which, I mean, they typically are a pretty good contested team. Uncontested football, though, Hawthorn absolutely dominated that area, +60. Turnovers, I mean, they were high, but it was a wet weather game, so they should be high. Hawthorn won the turnover game by 5, so a positive there again for the Hawks. When not winning clearances, you kind of want to win turnovers. Tackle game, obviously high, 88-85 in favour of the Hawks. Best players, top 5 according to my rating system, which, if you're new here, kind of rates players based on stats. Usually, like, the top class midfielders throughout a season last year were averaging about 72 to 75 a game. So anything above that as a midfielder or ruckman is really high. Some of the other positions typically will rate lower, but that's mainly due to the fact that they don't see the ball as much. So Joe Newcomb, he was best on ground in my rating system. He was an 89.73. He had 32 touches, 11 tackles, 9 clearances. He was, in my opinion, probably the difference between the two teams just about. He was outstanding. Paddy Cripps was a 78. Hewitt was good. Chera, and then Cottrell. So plenty of Carlton players in the list, all performing quite well, but Jai Newcomb just kind of ran this game himself. So yeah, they were the top 5. If we go through some of the other stuff, some team stats here, the Hawthorn forward line functioned pretty well in this. They got a few goals from their tools. Gunston came on as the sub and kicked a couple. Marbar Shoal got 2 or 3, so he did well. So Hawthorn's forward line was really good. Carlton's forward line really struggled. Obviously, if you didn't watch the game or didn't hear, Mackay was a late out. Charlie Curnow came in for his first game of the season, and he looked very underdone. Vossi didn't say that and said that he played his role, but he absolutely did not. He was well below his... not just well below his best, he was well below his average. I haven't checked back, but I would imagine that was a way worse game than anything he had last year. So not the ideal start to his season. I just don't think he was ready, but I could be wrong. I mean, conditions weren't ever really going to suit him, but the fact that Hawthorn had 2 key forwards that played pretty well, Carlton had none. Backlines, once again, Hawthorn's backline worked really well, as we kind of expect. They have a lot of good key backmen back there. Obviously, Scrimshaw was out for this one due to suspension/concussion, but they have plenty of other guns back there, so it didn't really hurt them too much. They did their typical send Sicily forward in the second half, and that kind of worked again. I think he only got 1 goal, but he did well there. Hardwick started forward and then swung back when Sicily went forward. So they have a bit of flexibility, I guess, in their team at the moment, which is outstanding. If you look at the midfield numbers, the ratings for both midfields were basically the same. Neither absolutely dominant, but a 54.1 for Carlton and a 53.2 for Hawthorn. So the Carlton midfield actually probably did outperform the Hawthorn midfield overall. And certainly if you take out Jai Newcomb, they would have. Other interesting facts, I guess Carlton's bottom 5 in this one were probably... a big reason why they lost it. Their bottom 5 was a long way off the Hawthorn's bottom 5 in ratings. Brownlow votes that I've put up for this one, Jai Newcomb 3, Hewitt 2, Josh Ward 1. MVP, I do top 5 players for each team, get votes each week. The winning team goes 10-8-6-4-2, losing team goes 5-4-3-2-1. So Newcomb, obviously, 10 votes there for Hawthorn, 8 for Ward, Battle, and then D'Ambrosio and CJ in his first game for the season. A running backman this year. He played wing last year. He started this season as a general defender. Did a good job of it most of the way through. He was Hawthorn's 5th best rated player. Jumping over to Carlton, Paddy Cripps gets the 5, George Hewitt 4, Adam Chera 3, Matty Cottrell 2, and Tom De Koning in the ruck gets 1. So overall, Hawthorn go 3-0. They're flying. If you talk to any Hawthorn supporter right now, they will tell you that they're a shoo-in for the premiership. They probably won't say that, but they are very confident at the moment. Meanwhile, Carlton, they go 0-2. They got a long season ahead of them. They got an important game this week. And then, they need to start winning some games. There's no doubt about that. Final thoughts on this one. We might actually have some other stats to look at that we could look at, I guess, before we completely wrap up this game. But I'm waiting to see what Hawthorn do against good opposition. I mean, Sydney are good opposition. It was a tight game that could have gone either way. Obviously, round 2, they beat Essendon, who have gone on to be absolutely atrocious in round 2. So in round 1, they played Essendon. And and then round 2, they've beaten Carlton, who haven't won a game yet. So we're still kind of waiting to see exactly where they stand. But they've had a solid enough start to the year. This game could have probably gone either way. Carlton had a kick straight. they certainly would have been a little bit closer than 20 points. Hawthorn did have an extra 2 shots for the match. Where did the scoring come from? The defensive half, 100%. Hawthorn absolutely dominated their defensive half transition in this one, which is a really good effort in the wet. 5-4-34 to 0-5-5 for Carlton. So Hawthorn absolutely dominated that area. Other than that, there's no big standouts in any of the scoring discrepancies. From like stoppage was only 5 points in it. Turnover was 9 points in favour of Hawthorn. So pretty consistent across the board for both teams in terms of score sources and origin of scoring. We'll jump into game number 2, which was Friday night football. It was the Western Bulldogs in their 100-year celebration, going up against Collingwood at the MCG. And this one went down to the wire. Absolutely went down to the wire. Could have gone either way. It was a weird old match, if I am being completely honest with you, because, yeah, it just was. Bulldogs got out of the blocks pretty well in this one. I think they kicked the first 3. It was 21 minutes into the game before Collingwood managed to get there first. They then took over the lead early in the second. Bulldogs got the lead back before half time. Collingwood then kicked the first 2 of the third quarter to take a lead and kind of just stayed in front most of the way. It tied up, I think, with about 15 minutes to go. Collingwood got a goal, and then it was just a bit of desperate times for both teams late in the game before Collingwood held on and won this one. Reef McGuinness went off with ACL injury, so he's out for most likely the season. Other than that, what else is news in this one? I mean, the big story was the umpiring. It was atrocious. It was definitely bad. Probably overall favoured Collingwood. There were some bad decisions both ways. Bulldogs' first goal was a bad decision as well. So, like, both teams did at times benefit from it, but there were some shocking calls. There is absolutely no doubt about it. If you just look at the free kick count, it heavily favoured Collingwood. You can't always take free kick count as gospel because it's never going to be even. It never should be even. You just want it to be fair. And, yeah, looking at stats of this one, Collingwood rated it a lot higher than the Bulldogs, mainly because they kicked poorly here, especially in that last quarter. +7 inside 50s. They wasted so many opportunities. Centre clearances were dominated by the Bulldogs, but stoppage clearances were dominated by Collingwood. Contested footy went way of Collingwood. Uncontested footy, less turnovers on Collingwood's side. So a lot of the numbers looked good for Collingwood in this game. They probably shouldn't have been as close as the game ended up, in all honesty. It was, some poor finishing and whatnot from Collingwood that's really hurt them in this one. Top 5 players: Tom Liberatore, Nick Dacos, Bailey Dale, Sean, Sam Darcy, Ed Richards were the top 5 rated players. So only one Collingwood player in the top 5 based on my ratings. However, if you go a bit deeper into the stats and into the players, I'm pretty sure it was, according to my ratings, it was 100% the bottom 5 where this game was won and lost. Western Bulldogs bottom 5 rated a 13.8, whereas Collingwood's was a 25.96. So a massive difference there. Like, the 25.96 is pretty solid for your bottom 5. A 13.82 is the lowest by any team's bottom 5 so far this season. No, it's not. Sorry, equal lowest. Port Adelaide against Collingwood was the same number, but still, a 13 is pretty terrible in that regard. Midfields was a very even battle. Both teams had really good midfields, I guess, in this game. Well, not really good, but both performed evenly. I think Liberatore was clearly the best player. Nick Dacos was solid, and as well for Collingwood, he had plenty of the ball. Backline, Collingwood's backline actually performed pretty well. If you take out the fact that Sam Darcy could not be stopped, the Collingwood defence did really well against everybody else. It was just Sam Darcy was the one bloke down up forward that Collingwood could not stop, and it's kind of how I see this game being, in all honesty. And you kind of forgive it from the Bulldogs because they are missing so many people, but they were led really well by their best players in each position. Bailey Dale down back, Libba in the middle, and Sam Darcy up forward. So their top three were outstanding, almost like three of the best four players on the ground, supported well by Ed Richards and a couple others. But then after you go past those, their depth just kind of didn't have it. Like, their next best forwards weren't great. Their next best midfielders, after the top couple, not typically great. The same with the back line. So you kind of forgive it. That will improve for the Bulldogs, no doubt about it, when they get some of these big midfielders, Bont, Treloar, plus other players in other positions. If they can get Jamara Ugle-Hagan back and a couple others, it could really, really change the outlook of this team, I guess. But overall, they definitely weren't the best team on the ground on the night, but you do definitely forgive that for multiple reasons. Score sources in this one, pretty even across the board. Collingwood were +9 from turnover, so slightly better in the turnover game. Score origin, once again, pretty similar, except Collingwood were good at getting their scores from the forward half, except for kicking straight. They kicked 4 goals, 8. If that had been 8 goals, 4, this game would have been blown apart. But the Bulldogs did score well out of the middle, 3 goals, 2-20 to Collingwood's 1-2-8. So just a little FYI there. They did dominate centre clearances, so and they turned them into scores reasonably well. 3 goals from centre bounces. I don't think there's anything else we really need to talk about here other than my Brownlow votes and MVP. Libba, Dacos, Bailey, Dale, 3-2-1 in that order. MVP, so for the winning team, Collingwood, Nick Dacos, Darcy Cameron, Jeremy Howe, Lockie Schultz, and Steele Sidebottom. And then the top 5 for the Bulldogs, I went Libba, Bailey Dale, Sam Darcy, Ed Richards, and Tim English. So yeah, that's the top 5 for both teams. In the end, Collingwood will be happy they got the 4 points. Bulldogs, I don't think they can be too disappointed. They're 1-1. They've got plenty of good players to come back into this team. So I think their season can only, well, it could go both ways, but has the potential to improve. So definitely not doom and gloom for the Doggies just yet. Collingwood, they go into the bye this weekend and coming off a win, 2 wins in a row, a lot better situation than they were in at this time last year. They lost their first 3 last year, so they will be stoked that they're going into their bye 2-1. Next up, we've got Saturday afternoon. This is the third of 4 matches that I went to. It was the Bombers Adelaide at the MCG. Sunny, perfect conditions, and wowee, was it a high-scoring affair. 25-11, 161 for the Crows. 15-10, 100 for the Dons. A game that never really looked like any other result than what we got, in all honesty. It was pretty open and pretty consistently going the way of the Crows. The Bombers did kick the first of the game. They weren't far behind at quarter time. It was a 15-point margin at quarter time. But by halftime, we were pretty convinced it was over. It was 40 points. Bombers did kick the first 2 of the third quarter, but then from that point on, by third quarter time, it was well and truly over. And then the last quarter, once again, was just a shootout. 7 goals to 6 goals. So 13 goals kicked in that last quarter. Yeah, Adelaide, they're flying. They're looking outstanding. They've had a perfect start to their season. 2025 is off to a flyer. Meanwhile, the Dons, it's not shaping great for them at the moment. They are a very young team, so you kind of got to expect and understand that they're going to struggle at times. I think you just got to kind of accept it. Best players, there's no doubt. Zach Merritt was outstanding in this one. His numbers in this game were freakish, to say the least. He had 36 touches and 4 goals won. Could have actually kicked a couple more as well. He tried to pass them off in the end. Didn't get marked in the first quarter or two, but could have easily had 6 probably. As well as 6 clearances. He was everywhere. 748 metres gained. Matt Crouch, Jordan Dawson, both outstanding in the midfield for the Crows. And then the small forwards for Adelaide were also really good. Ben Keys had 22 touches, 4 goals. Rochelle had 16 touches, 4 goals. Neil Bullen had 18 touches, 2 goals. Jumping into the talls, Thilthorpe, he had 16 and 3. So they were all outstanding. Joe Caldwell was the only other bomber that was really noticed by anybody. He had 27 and a goal, so he played pretty well as well. He was the 5th highest rated player on the ground. You look at team ratings in this one, Adelaide 54 to Essendon 41. It's a massive difference. There's no two ways about it, really. It was clearly one team really good and one team not there. The Bombers' defence is a concern. Adelaide probably wouldn't be stoked about the fact that they've conceded 15 goals in a game of football here, but they would be very happy that they won by 61 points. Tidy up their defence is certainly something that needs to happen, but overall, they were a much better team. Their forward line looked really good. Their midfield absolutely dominated, outside of the fact that Zach Merritt played really well. The Adelaide players were all over Essendon, all over the ground. You look at any area, they won it. The Adelaide forward line was outstanding. It looked absolutely top-notch. Probably, off the top of my head, would have been the highest rating forward line, which isn't surprising. They kicked 25 goals. But, a lot of it did come from their forward line. Did get a couple goals here and there from midfielders, but overall, it was the forward line. I just don't see any areas of the ground or the game where Essendon really won their matchups. Other than Merritt and maybe Caldwell, there's no one really that was great. Nick Bryan was apparently the highest rated ruckman, but it wasn't a great day for them. Brownlow votes went 3, Zach Merritt, Jordan Dawson 2, Ben Keys 1. It's going to be interesting on Brownlow night, that one, because, Zach Merritt was clearly the best player on the ground. However, Adelaide absolutely dominated this one. So, Dawson, Keys, Matt Crouch, all definitely going to be in the conversation for votes, but I believe Zach Merritt should get the 3, in my opinion. Looking at score sources and whatnot in this one, it's going to be high. But turnovers, 17-7 Adelaide scored. So they scored over 100 points from turnovers. That's more than most teams kick in a week. Was more than any team averages other than Adelaide. 17-7, 109. That is incredible from the turnovers. 10-7, 67 from Essendon is a quite good number. But that reverse number, that is insanity. Defensive half transition, Adelaide did that well as well. 10 goals 3, 63 to 5-1, 31 for the Bombers. Forward half Origin, 12-8, 80. So they scored really well from that as well. Centre bounce, both teams kicked 3 goals. Overall, it was a high scoring game. So the numbers are going to be quite astronomically big, I guess. You just kind of got to accept that, but some of those numbers are wild. Inside 50s, 63 for the Crows, so an extra 4 than they had last week, plus 15 for the game. Bombers just handballed it too much and didn't make much ground with it. If you look at the possession heat maps, especially first half, actually probably all the way through the game, Bombers had a lot of it, but they just had a lot of it in their backline and not really moving it forward, whereas the heat map for Adelaide, they're just forward of half. Possessions were really high, so it's clearly obvious which way this game just balanced out, I guess. Clearance game was another good area for the Bombers. That's the one bright light I guess they've had at the start of this season is they've been good in the clearance game, +6 in centre clearances in this one. Uncontested footy massively in Adelaide's favour, +41 for the match. You look at contested footy, it was +1 to Adelaide, so all the possession was uncontested. That was the difference here. Turnovers were a lot lower for Adelaide, which isn't that surprising. You win uncontested footy, you're less likely to turn it over, aren't you? The mark count, 129 to 59 is a ridiculous difference. That's like 70 different. When Essendon last week against Hawthorn had almost 100, I think they had like 80 something, maybe 90 marks, so they dropped way off this week in that regard. Tackle count, Adelaide won that even though they had more of the football. Explain that one without telling me that. Yeah, look, it was a rough day for the Bombers. They're probably going to have a few more of these throughout the season. Some of their young players look good. Sam Draper got a couple goals, maybe 3 in the end. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, look, they don't have the experience that some other teams do. Their backline is in disarray 90% of the time, and it was a rough afternoon for the Bombers. Crows, they're laughing. 2 big wins to start their season. They're flying. They'll be stoked. They're heading into this weekend. Bombers need to reassess and set themselves up, I guess, because otherwise their season could get out of hand very quickly. Jump into the next game, which was game 4 of the weekend. Saturday evening game. Port Adelaide had a very important game here, hosting Richmond. Obviously, Port Adelaide coming off a bad loss in week 1. Richmond coming off an incredible win in their first game, and Port Adelaide certainly showed up. 21-14, 140. Richmond 9 goals, 14-68. So the Tigs did kick poorly, but they were never in this one. I didn't see it live. I've since watched the replay. Obviously I was travelling between the 2 Saturday games in Melbourne, so didn't have a chance to look at it, watch the scores happen. But yeah, it was just one-way traffic. 6 goals to 1 in the first quarter for Port Adelaide, and then 7-2 in the second, 6-3 in the third, and then the final quarter kind of mellowed out a bit, but 2 goals to 3 in favour of Port Adelaide. They pretty much almost effectively wiped out their bad percentage from week 1. Not quite. They lost by 91 and then win this one by 72, but they certainly cancelled out a fair chunk of their bad percentage from game 1 with a really good performance. Perhaps didn't finish it off as well as they would have liked, but overall a really good performance. Lukosius was an early sub out of this one, and I believe he's broken his kneecap, so he's going to be missing an extended period of time. Not 100% sure how long a broken kneecap will be, but he'll be out for a little bit. Best players, Connor Rosé was outstanding. 39 touches. He's had well in the 30s both weeks, so incredible start to his year. Burgoyne was outstanding on the wing, 32 touches and 2 goals. Burn-Jones was really good, as was Georgiadis and Willem Drew. Best Richmond players were well down the list in terms of ratings from this game. As you can see, team rating of 58.65 for the Port Adelaide and Richmond a 36.96. Incredible turnaround from Port Adelaide, but also it was kind of needed after a really bad start to their year last week against Collingwood. So they certainly turned that around. Like, their rating last week was a 39.5, so they were plus 19 this week. Much better performance. Brownlow votes, I went Rose 3, Burgoyne 2. I think those two were clearly the best players on the ground. I've gone third, 1 vote to Georgiadis. I think he was good as a tall forward. Could go to about 8 other Port Adelaide players, though, that last vote, I think. MVP votes in this one for Port Adelaide: Connor Rosé, Jace Burgoyne, Darcy Burn-Jones, Georgiadis, and Willem Drew gets 2. Meanwhile, for the Tigers, top 5 players were Seth Campbell, Ryan Mansell, Camden McIntosh, Toby Nankervis, and Ben Miller. Yeah, I don't know what to make of this game other than, like, it kind of went the way we expected it to in many ways. Like, who really was expecting Richmond to... I mean, they did win week 1 and Port Adelaide were atrocious, but this is what you kind of expect. Not every week to go for the Tigers, but there will be plenty of games like this for them this year. They're just too young, too inexperienced. Some weeks their pressure game they'll bring and they'll play really well. If they're just slightly off, they are going to get absolutely mauled, and that is what happened here. You look at the stats, and it's a tough read in a lot of regards for Richmond. Plus, like 181 disposals in favour of Port Adelaide, so they just had the ball the whole time. Richmond actually got 50 inside 50s for the match, which was only 6 less than Port Adelaide. And it's even more than they had in their win against Carlton. But, like, the game was well and truly over before they were getting all of these inside 50s, to be fair. Clearance game, overall, +4 for the Tigers. +8 in centre clearances, which means obviously Port Adelaide did win stoppage clearances. But once again, centre work, pretty good from Tigers, but you kind of expect them to. They should do well in that regard. They have experience in centre bounce. All their players that play the big numbers in centre bounce attendances, they're all experienced players. Like Toby Nankervis, Tim Taranto, like they've all played plenty of games, so they should do pretty well in that area. What they do after that, maybe not so much. Contested footy, Richmond actually won +6 possessions, which is crazy. Uncontested football, though, was 353 for Port Adelaide, 174 for Richmond. That's close to a 200 possession difference in uncontested football. It's 179, which is insane. It may have happened before. Maybe should have done some research into it, but that is one of the biggest discrepancies I've ever seen in uncontested football. Turnovers, obviously Port Adelaide looked after it better. Every time they had the ball, they weren't under pressure. Marks 133 to 70. Scoring, obviously, Richmond kicked pretty poorly, but it was fine. It was game over well before they started kicking poorly. Tackles 52 to 39 in favour of Port Adelaide, so not massive numbers for either team. But yeah, that's that game. Scoring sources stoppage. Port Adelaide 9-10-64 for the match. Richmond 5-5-35, so a bit of a discrepancy there. And from turnover, 12-4, 76 to 4-8 for Richmond. Origin came from the back line for Port Adelaide. If you look at scoring from the forward half, it was pretty close, but from the back line, it was 76 to 16. So Port Adelaide managed to transition the ball really well, whereas Richmond were not able to. Scoring from centre bounce also heavily favoured Port Adelaide, 3-1-19 to 0-4-4. So Richmond had 4 opportunities, as did Port Adelaide, but the difference was one team has gone and kicked 19 points out of it, and one's kicked 4, so it ends up being a bit of a difference there. I think that's pretty much all for that game. Port Adelaide bounced back. They get their season going and rolling. Obviously, a really good day for South Australian football. It's what they needed to do. It's what they did do, so they'll be happy. Richmond, I don't think they'll be too disappointed. It's kind of what they're going to get at certain points this year. They're 1-1. They're still above multiple teams that haven't won a game yet. They probably won't win too many more than 3 or 4, you wouldn't think. But just keep getting that experience into the kids, I guess, is their number one priority. Moving on to the other Saturday game. It was St Kilda Geelong at Marvel Stadium, and St Kilda, who have the incredible record over Geelong at Marvel, continued that one in this one. Ends up being a close game, 15-8-98 to 13-13-91. As someone that was at this game, it felt like St Kilda should be 10 goals up most of the way through this. And did kind of look in complete control until that last quarter when all of a sudden the Cats just started coming back and put a lot of pressure on them. Multiple points of this match were at 40 points the margin. So late in the second, early in the third, a couple times, it was all about 40 points margin in favour of St Kilda. And then all of a sudden, it just started slowly turning, I guess. Geelong always kind of threatened to fully turn the game on, and then they made some horrible mistakes. Happened multiple times. They kicked 3 of the last 4 of the third quarter just to give them a little bit of a sniff, and then they did manage the last 3 goals of the match before, which got them close. Then they kicked 4 behinds without managing to get quite over the line. They thought they'd put themselves within a kick with about 5 or 6 minutes to go, but that was reviewed and found to be a behind. And yeah, in the end, St Kilda, I think, were by far the better team in this game. But they kind of just didn't finish it off as well as perhaps they would have liked, I guess, in a way. You look at the team stats in this one, like they were plus 68 disposals for the match. Plus 2 inside 50s is pretty close. Plus 7 clearances for the Saints. They didn't look after the ball too well. Geelong obviously won that area of the game. But the uncontested footy was all the way of St Kilda. They had over 105 over 100 marks, 105 to 81. So dominated the marking game. Tackles were a really high count for both teams. 88 to 75 is a really high number under the lid at Marvel. In the end, though, it blows me away that this game ended up being 7 points, and for a fair chunk of that last 8 minutes, it looked like Geelong were going to win it, which would have been heavily disappointing if that had been the case for the Saints, because they certainly looked like they had the game in their control for 85% of this one. Best players, Jack McRae has come across and joined St Kilda. Obviously, they were bad in week 1, but he was their best player week 1, and he's come out and done it again this week. 35 touches, 10 tackles, 9 clearances. He was doing it all from basically the start of this match all the way through. Jack Sinclair, he was good. Rowan Marshall, Windhager, Mason Wood. As you can see, all St Kilda players, they really did perform well in this one, except for the fact that they maybe let their foot off the pedal, or Geelong just finally turned it on. I don't know, but the game kind of looked a lot different in that last quarter. Worth noting, Tom Stewart for Geelong did get injured. I think it was in the first quarter. It was late in the first quarter. So he got subbed out. Bailey Smith was a late out as well, but they expect him back this week. Across the board, both, it was the top end that won this one for the Saints. Their best players were outstanding. You look at the top 5, the difference in ratings, it was 82.7 for Saints, 60.6 for Geelong. Top 10, once again, massive discrepancy, but the bottom 5 for Geelong was actually better than the bottom 5 for St Kilda. So top end seemed to be the way of St Kilda, but they dropped off a little bit with their younger players down the bottom. I don't know, maybe. Brownlow votes, I went 3 for McRae, 2 for Sinclair, and 1 for Rowan Marshall. MVP for St Kilda, McRae, Sinclair, Marshall, Windhager, Mason Wood. For Geelong, it went the way of Holmes, Blixarves, Jack Henry, who was outstanding in that last quarter, taking intercept marks, Connor O'Sullivan, and Tom Atkins. Score sources in this one. St Kilda got 2 goals from kick-ins, which is a good return. Stoppage was pretty even, 36 to 35 in favour of the Saints, and turnover pretty close again, 50 to 56 in favour of Geelong. Score origin, Geelong got it from the back line, 38 to 31, but the forward line was where St Kilda did their damage, 64 to 40. However, Geelong just wasted their opportunities in that regard. 5 goals, 10. And then from the centre bounce, it was 13-3 in favour of the Cats. I don't think there's too much else to say about this game, in all honesty. It was one that, based on round one performances, you would have said St Kilda were not a chance. But the way that they play Marvel Stadium against the Cats is crazy. Obviously, St Kilda are a better team under the lid. They've shown that the previous years. Like at Marvel Stadium, that's where they play their best football. Meanwhile, Geelong play probably their worst football in the country at Marvel Stadium. So it was always shaping as one that potentially was a dangerous one to be an upset. But based on what you saw in week one, you just couldn't comfortably predict it. I couldn't, at least. It was just, Geelong was so good round one, and St Kilda was so bad. What do we take from this game? I think for now we just kind of forget it. We say, yeah, St Kilda are better than we thought after round one, but we need to see them do it again before we're fully convinced. Meanwhile, for Geelong, I think we just forgive it, put it down as a loss and move on. Say, let's see what you got next week, because I don't imagine like a performance like that would be too common for Geelong, but they also don't play at Marvel too often, so I don't think the fact that they're bad there is too concerning. We move on to the Sunday games, and it started with what looked like it could be another upset. Ended up not being, thanks to Brisbane finally switching on and kicking goals. But they won it 14-10-94 to the Eagles, 11-9-75. Top players in this one, Zorko, Neal, McCluggage, Ryan, Dunkley. Ratings for the teams massively in favour of Brisbane, even though they only just won it by 19 points, thanks to a really good second half. It was, the ratings still heavily favoured the Lions. It was 5-1 for the Eagles in the first quarter, and then the second quarter was pretty even, 3-1 to 3-1. So it was like a 24-point lead at half-time in favour of the Eagles, and it was just like, do we believe that this could be the thing? But before three-quarter time, Brisbane hit the lead before the Eagles did kick the last goal of the third quarter, just to take the lead back going into the fourth and give themselves a sniff. But the final quarter was one-way traffic. 5-4 to 2 goals straight for the Eagles. And the Lions get the win. A lot of people would tell you it wasn't a great performance by the Lions. I don't think either of their two games so far have been incredibly great, but the numbers of this one suggest that they should have won this by a lot more. They dominated possession plus 54. They dominated inside 50s plus 12. They had overall more shots at it. They controlled clearance game plus 12. Absolutely dominated uncontested footy. Dominated the mark game, 148 for the match is insanely high. So just so much looked good for the Lions on paper. They didn't put it together and make full use of it, I don't think, here, but it kind of reminded me of Brisbane Lions early last year, their first 5, 6, maybe even 10 weeks, where their numbers consistently looked pretty good everywhere but their forward line. They just couldn't either hit that last target, or when they did, they would they just weren't finishing off plays that they should have been. They would dominate field position, they would dominate inside 50s, they would dominate clearances, and week in, week out, it was just something about their finishing just could never happen. They could never get that last touch to create the perfect, or create a really good scoring opportunity, and that's just where it was faltering. And that's what we've seen so far. This one was pretty much the blueprint of what early last year was for the Lions. Thankfully for them, though, this year compared to last year, they got the win. That match last year is probably one they lose. So, early last year, that is, not late last year. I don't think it's to be concerned with. I still think Brisbane are one of the best, if not the best team in the competition. So, not their best performance, but I guess what they needed to do, they got done. Outstanding games by Zorko, Neil. In this one, Dunkley was good again. It was definitely Brisbane were the best players on the ground, and overall, you look across the field, they should have won by more. Their midfield was massive, massively higher rated midfield based on this game. Backline as well, dominated Brisbane, 57 rated to 45 for West Coast. The forward lines didn't work for either team though. 39 rated forward line for Brisbane, a 35 for West Coast. So that was their main issue in this one, was the forward line just didn't work. So a few things to work on for the Lions. Meanwhile, Eagles will be pretty happy with it, in all honesty, after an absolute disaster of a round one game against Gold Coast at home. They would have loved 4 points here, but at the end of the day, they were competitive, and after what happened in their first game of the year, you got to be happy with that. There's a long way to go for the Eagles, but a road game at the Gabba, it was going to be tough, and they took it right up to them. I think clearly Brisbane were the best team on the day and won because of that, but there's certainly some positive signs in it there for the Eagles going forward. Score sources in this one, it was 40-33 in favour of Brisbane for the stoppage and 54-42 in favour of them in turnover. So pretty much controlled both all areas there for score sources. Brisbane score origin, probably the most work from the back line here for Brisbane. 8 goals to 50 to 5 232. Meanwhile, forward half is where both teams kicked inaccurately, 6-7 to 5-6. Only one goal scored from the centre bounce in this game, and that was to the Eagles. So that's basically a wrap up of this game. It was one where West Coast put up a fight. Hopefully we see more of that sort of fight throughout the rest of the year, but Brisbane were clearly the better team and got the points in the end. They play Geelong now this weekend, in what is the rescheduled match from opening round, and it shapes up as an important game for both teams. Brisbane obviously 2-0, so it's not bad, but they haven't looked fantastic yet. Meanwhile, Geelong, they're 1-1. They've had one cracking game and one not so good game, so they'll be very keen to get out there and show a better performance this weekend. We move on to game number 7 of the weekend. It was North Melbourne v Melbourne. This was at Marvel Stadium, and I guess an upset. Melbourne were favourites in this one after a pretty solid performance in round 1 against GWS. North Melbourne put up a courageous loss against Bulldogs in the first week, and then they've come out and done this. 19-11, 125 to 9-12, 66. In a fourth quarter blitz for the ages. If you want to watch the story of this game, jump on KO or whatever and go through to 3/4 time and watch the first 6 or 7 minutes after 3/4 time. That is where this game was won. North Melbourne were, I wouldn't say fully in control, but they were in control going into the final quarter. It was, 18-point margin, so not out of the realms of possibility for Melbourne at 3/4 time. It was close first half, but North Melbourne were controlling the game, but controlling it in a way that Melbourne certainly still had a chance. But then, Melbourne just came out and North Melbourne just came out and went bang, bang, bang. They kicked the first 6 of the final quarter within the first 11 minutes of the quarter. They kicked 3 in the first 3 minutes 44. Then there was a little spell before they kicked another 3 in about a 4 to 5 minute period. So, incredible start to that final quarter, multiple people kicking multiple goals. Like Curtis got a couple, Larky got a couple, and then Zerha got a couple. So 3 players got 2 each within the space of 11 minutes. And all of a sudden that lead went from 18 points to like 50 points, which is an unreal spurt. Like 6 goals in 11 minutes. That's what really good teams do. So just a little glimmer of hope for North Melbourne at the end of this long tunnel that they've been going down. They ended up winning by 59 points. Thanks to that barrage, I guess, in that early final quarter. You look at the disposal numbers, plus 52 for the Roos. They definitely had the ball a lot more. Inside 50s actually went the way of the Demons, which will only disappoint Melbourne fans, I think. Not the best kicking in front of goal for them, so that did hurt them. Clearance-wise, though, Kangaroos plus 12. Really good number there for them. They had more uncontested footy, slightly more contested football. Turnover game was actually won by Melbourne, which, I mean, they need to do if they're losing the clearances, but just didn't make use of it. We'll look at score sources in a minute. Yeah, what else can we make from this game? Best players, if you're not watching the screen, Cade Chandler for Melbourne was highest rated on the ground, 88.8. Clayton Oliver was really good, but then after that it was all North Melbourne. Tristan Xerri, Tom Powell, Paul Curtis, Simpkin, Caleb Daniel. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. Brownlow votes, I went Cade Chandler 3. Don't think you can go past him. I think he was very good in this one. Paul Curtis gets 2 and Tom Powell gets 1. It was pretty consistent, even game across the board for North Melbourne, so there's probably quite a few people in the discussion for votes. MVP-wise, I went for the winning team, North Melbourne, Tristan Xerri, Tom Powell, Paul Curtis, Jai Simpkin and Caleb Daniel. Meanwhile, for Melbourne, it went Cade Chandler, Clayton Oliver, Christian Salem, Jacob Bowie and Jack Viney. Score sources for this one. Both teams got 1 goal straight from the kick-in. From stoppages, North Melbourne thrashed them. 9-5-59 to 2-5-17. So that's a 42-point difference there, just in the stoppage game. Turnover went their way as well, but only plus 17, 60 to 43. So that stoppage number is a massive difference. Score origin from the back line, 38 to 22 in favour of the Roos. From the forward half, 44 to 30 in favour of the Roos. And then from the centre bounce, 7 goals. You heard that right. Kangaroos got 7 goals, 1 from the centre bounce in this one. That is ridiculous. 43 to 14 for the match. 7 goals. That's crazy. What were Melbourne doing? It's always hard to defend like centre breaks. That's when it's definitely going to be even numbers ahead of the ball. But yeah, North only got 15 centre clearances for the game, but scored 7 goals from those 15. So almost 50% of the time they got the centre clearance, they turned it into a goal, and over 50% of the time they managed to get a score from the centre break. So that's crazy numbers. Really good performance in that regard for the Kangaroos. So they go 1-1. Look, they've had an okay start to the year. Close-ish. Loss against the Bulldogs was solid. And then this performance was actually really great. Melbourne, an honourable loss against GWS in round 1, followed by I won't say disaster, but it's pretty close to a disastrous round 2 for Melbourne. They need to come out this weekend and, I guess, show us a lot more than they did last weekend, because, they're not going to win many games if they roll over like that too often. That leaves us just one more match to have a look at. It was Sunday evening game. It was Fremantle hosting Sydney over at Optus Stadium, and it was a nail biter, one that Fremantle looked good in. Pardon me, sorry. Fremantle looked good in early, but Sydney just stuck around and ended up getting over the line. It was 9-11-65, 9-14-68, and the hero was Joel Amartey, who kicked a goal 26 minutes into the final quarter to get the win. With a couple minutes left. I think there was less than 2 minutes to go when he kicked it. Might have only been a minute. Minute 30 from memory now that I think about it a bit more. 4-0 in the first quarter in favour of Fremantle. How they ended up losing this one, Sydney did have their chances, to be fair. They kicked 0-5 in the quarter, but Fremantle just didn't kick away with it, I guess. Sydney just didn't give up. They stayed in it. Got it close-ish at half-time, 9-point margin, and then took the lead late in the third quarter before Fremantle kicked the last of that quarter to have a 2-point lead. Fremantle kicked the first goal of the last quarter 14 minutes in. Sydney got one back straight away, and then Joel Amartey kicked the game winner. And then right on the siren, it nearly ended up being a mark for Fremantle, but the siren went while the ball was in the air. And that was a wrap on that one. A disaster of a season start for Fremantle. Meanwhile, Sydney avert the disastrous start to the season by getting this win. We'll get into all of that side of things shortly. We'll have a look at the numbers here. Fremantle plus 15 disposals, plus 4 inside 50s. Clearance game for them is not working at the moment. They were the number one clearance team in the competition last year, and they got pumped in that area today. Lost it by 12. That is a drubbing and not a great sign or start to their season. Sydney's clearance work has been pretty good, in all honesty, but from Fremantle, who were the best last year, to not there at the moment is concerning. I know they are missing Hayden Young out of that normal midfield role, but it's an area that probably need to do some work on. Contested footy went the way of the Dockers, as did uncontested footy. Turnovers, that area of the game was won by Freo by 5. So a lot of their numbers look all right in this, but they just didn't convert it in the end. Sydney probably pressured a little bit better, plus 9 in tackle count. Just some areas that need some touching up, I guess, for both teams. After this one, as we said, Joel Amartey kicked 2. Josh Tracy had a good game. He kicked 4 goals in this one. Best players, probably Chad Warner. He rated highest, an 82.36. He was really good. 26 touches, a goal. Luke Jackson was good for the Dockers. Jordan Clark, Tracy, Brayshaw, Roberts. Both teams, as you can see, my team ratings basically identical. 44.69 for Freo, 44.74 for Sydney. It's a game that could have gone either way, and in the end, it went the way of the Dockers. What else do we have from this game to take? It's a tough one. Chad Warner, I think, gets the 3 votes. Probably Jordan Clark 2, Brayshaw 1, maybe. But I think Chad Warner clearly gets the 3. That's about the long and the short of this game. Where does that leave both of these teams? In an interesting spot, let's put it that way. So it means that Sydney now have a win on the board. They have the bye coming up this weekend, so a good time to get that win. It could have been a potentially bad time for them if they went 0-3. I mean, Brisbane did that last year and came back and played finals and ended up winning the premiership. So it wouldn't have been like season over by any stretch of the imagination. But they just needed to get a tight one because they were 0-2. Both of those games, they certainly had a chance in. The first game they lost. They were in the last quarter against Hawthorn, made a mistake. I think they were within a kick when they made a terrible mistake that put them more than 2 kicks down, and then they just couldn't get over the line. Couldn't get it back, I guess. And then last week against Brisbane, they were in that all the way and only lost by 4 points. So to get a win in a tight one is a massive positive for the Swans. Meanwhile, Fremantle are... oh dear. Yeah, not good for them. Obviously, they got smacked opening round. First game. It wasn't opening round. In round one, down in Geelong, they got smacked. And everyone was like, look, we'll forgive it. I'm still of the opinion we forgive it. It was the first game of the season. But to then back it up with a home loss is not outstanding for them. A team that had some high prospects this year, had some high beliefs, to start 0-2 is not a great spot. Both teams obviously did play prelim finals last year, so we're not giving up on them by any stretch of the imagination, but we do need to see something from them, and they get the perfect opportunity this weekend. All of a sudden, the Western Derby, Sunday night this week, is maybe a must-watch. Currently 17th and 18th on the ladder. It might be the game to watch this weekend. So, tune in for that, I guess. Before we wrap up this episode, let's have a look at how my tips went. And the tips I put on the channel were atrocious. I did change a couple of these well before the games started, after the podcast went live, but we only went 3 out of possible 8. Probably the 3 we were almost most confident with. Certainly the Brisbane one, Port Adelaide were pretty confident. Hawthorn were pretty confident. But we went Bulldogs to beat Collingwood. It ended up being Collingwood win by like 5 or 6 points. So we weren't too far off that. We went Essendon by 9, and that was atrocious. We'll cop that one. They lost by 60 points to Adelaide. Geelong we went by 35. They lost by 8 points to St Kilda. Melbourne, we went for plus 19, and North Melbourne won it by 59, so that was a disgrace. And then Fremantle, we went by plus 5, and they lost by 3, so that one was close. I did end up, before the games, changing the Bulldogs, Essendon, and Fremantle ones, so I actually got 6 in my online tipping competitions, but just 3 out of 8 on my podcast, so not a good week. 11 out of 19 for the season. We're going to turn that around. This week we're going to run it back, and we're going to get 8 out of 8 you watch. That's a wrap on everything this week on the podcast. Don't forget to go check out the socials. Instagram is getting a lot of posts lately, so go check them out. They get these game reviews after each match, just the little post that I had on here. As well as we do rookie rankings on there during the week. We do our team of the week. We do power rankings. We do all that sort of stuff. So go check out Instagram, Twitter. We live tweet during games, before games, after games, all that. We have plenty of tweets going out. Blue Sky as well. So go check that out. Other than that, don't forget to follow, like this podcast. We do 2 a week. The next one will be on Thursday. It will be a preview of round 3 of 2025. I thank you if you've stuck around, enjoyed it. Make sure you tell your friends if you did enjoy it. Get as many people around this as you can. Don't forget, we'll be back later this week. Until then, thank you. Catch you next time.